Welcome to the Wrestling with Success podcast. In this show, you'll learn how to use lessons used in sports so you can use failure as your secret weapon for success and succeed in the real world. Here's your host, former Division I All-American wrestler, former Division I head coach, husband, father, adventure seeker, and entrepreneur, Jim Harshaw.
Welcome to episode 48 of Wrestling with Success. Today I bring you Keith Wilford. Keith works with athletes to prepare them to be physically and mentally strong for the next challenge of their journey. Built into this effort is a clear focus on the concept of the importance of discovering the meaning of hard work as they attempt to exceed their own expectations. Keith has risen to national prominence by delivering high-energy, relevant messages to groups across the country that encourage and inspire people of all ages and all backgrounds to break those barriers that tend to preclude them from reaching their potential. Keith, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Jim.
So Chris Spieler, who I interviewed in episode 44, Chris Spieler of CrossFit fame, introduced us and he connected us. And you had just, when you and I first spoke, you had just wrapped up a swing across the country speaking to groups all over the country. Chris was impressed with your message, as I've become since getting to know you. So tell me, what is the Wilford Movement? Tell me what you're doing.
So the Wilford Movement is simply a connection of my struggles in life to the realities that I believe that connect with the realities of what people deal with on a regular basis. So Wilford clearly being my last name, and movement is just this idea of kind of moving from where your current state is at to a whole nother level. And I think, you know, a lot of times the connection between one human story to another is just what allows people to, first of all, listen, and second of all, recognize that you're not the only person going through it. So the Wilford Movement is it's just that. It's me connecting with the group of people that I've been fortunate enough to meet all over this country.
Man, you hit the nail on the head, and that strikes a chord with me because, Keith, I talk a lot about, I ask all my guests really to share some sort of failure or story of adversity. And here's the thing, we all have this story of struggle and failure and setbacks. So the listener, wherever you're at, whether you're in the gym working out or driving to work and you got your earbuds in, and we all have these struggles, right? And I think sometimes I come across on my podcast and through my content is like life is perfect. It's like, it's not, you know, it's not perfect for anyone. I don't care who it is. The more you dive into the story of successful people, the more we realize we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. There's like all these failures, all these struggles, all these obstacles, all these reasons why they shouldn't have been successful. And we can either bow to that or we can overcome it. So talk about, you know, I don't know if you want to get into maybe your backstory a little bit and sort of some of the things you've had to overcome in your life and sort of the message that you share with the groups.
Well, you know, honestly, I think I'm like any other, you know, young person that kind of came up with, you know, the athletic drive, you know, played club sports and was fortunate enough to play college sports and then jumped into the professional ranks for a very brief time. But sometimes it's just a matter of getting there. And I think the biggest struggle that I ever think I had is I never really took the time to sit quietly enough to find out whether or not they were all the things that I wanted, first of all, or whether or not they were the expectations of other people. And, you know, and I think with that being said, I just kept kind of going and going and going. And I never stopped to say, you know, Keith, are you actually happy with the person that you are in addition to the goals that you're trying to reach? And, you know, I guess it's almost 6 years ago now. You know, I was in the 2010 CrossFit Games. This was prior to it becoming, you know, it was like the first year that it kind of came to Carson and where it became very big. You know, I suffered a massive heart attack. And I think, you know, at that point in my life, everything, all of who I was was being invested into being, I guess, quote, the fittest man in the world. And I think the hardest thing for me is I never took the time to really step back and make sure that I was going along in the process of getting to my goals. And that led to really a hard period of time in my life. And you know, a lot of people may say, you know, you just kind of get up, you do what you need to do. But it was such a challenge for me to, I mean, NFL players say it all the time, you know, after Sunday afternoon, when you don't have that anymore, you really have a hard time finding out kind of what your identity was. And you know, and that ended up leading to a pretty big state of depression for a couple months, but ultimately finding out that it was a couple years. I lost the opportunity to be with my family and be with my son through this sickness. And ultimately, you know, thoughts of suicide definitely came into play. And I'll be honest with you, Jim, at that point in time in my life, I never would have thought that any of this would have happened to me. And no different than anybody else that goes through something, you know, one day you're pretty good, you know, you're okay. And I think the biggest struggle that I had was at 32, 33 years old. How did I identify myself? And I think that that's what I really, really struggled with. And, you know, I can tell you, you know, as a kid, I dealt with a lot of self-confidence issues. In college, I dealt with a lot of alcohol abuse, a lot of drug abuse. So this isn't something that was just happened because of a massive heart attack. I think it's something I've been dealing with for years, but I always masked it based off of playing sports, based off of just kind of going and going and going until finally, and whether or not it's metaphoric or not, my heart stopped and the love for myself stopped. And the one thing I know is that when that compassion and that love is not there for yourself, it wasn't anything that I could give to my family. It wasn't anything that I could give to my son. And, you know, when you're going through it, that's the first thing. And you realize, you know, how selfish you are, you know, how you're living your life. And it's wild. You know, you would have never thought that a two-time All-American athlete, a former pro athlete, an all-conference player would go through this. But, you know, I think for anybody that's listening, it happens to us all. And how you manage it and how you deal with it makes all the difference. So I've been fortunate enough to travel the country and really hit the emotions of a lot of young people, but quite frankly, anybody that I can connect with. And as much as I can say I'm doing a lot for them, they're probably doing more for me in regards to always coming back from, you know, this level of kind of recovery. And that's how I look at it. I mean, I don't look at 5 weeks from now. You know, I look at it one day at a time. And a lot of people would say that's kind of the path of a lot of people that go through addiction. But, you know, as healthy as I am in mind and spirit, I live one day at a time now, and I've been fortunate enough to get a second opportunity.
And so, to be clear, you were football or was it lacrosse? I
was lacrosse. So I played lacrosse, and I was fortunate enough to play. I tried out and went out for the arena football team, the Philadelphia Soul, as well. I just, you know, at that point in time, I was probably at the peak of my athletic career. So lacrosse and later football became what I was good at.
And Keith, what you just shared was deep and powerful, and I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing that, because that's a message that I know resonates with at some level with every listener. Because, you know, whether we've been through a heart attack or whether we've been through depression or had suicidal thoughts, we all have struggled at some level, maybe at that same level, maybe not, but we can all relate to that struggle. You know, you talk about you didn't know what your identity was, and we're all former athlete. Everybody, you know, this show is for the former athlete, and we all lose that identity a little bit, right? When we leave sports, unless we go into coaching, and even then sometimes, but unless we go into coaching, we kind of lose that part of ourself. We try to figure out what's our identity, because we always had that team, that group of people, that people who we could hang around and have a conversation about our sport, and we're growing and working towards a common goal, which is why I have a mastermind program called Reveal Your Path, which is why it's so people enjoy it so much and get so much out of it, because you feel like you're reconnected to a team of like-minded people, but we lose that. And you talk about depression, you say you had it for a few months, which is probably more like a few years, and led to these thoughts. It's like, if you don't hit that pause button, because you said you didn't take the time to sit down quietly, you never stopped. You just kept going and going and going without hitting the pause button. But if you don't do that, you lose. You don't know who you are, or what you're striving for, what you're getting up and going to work for. It's like, so many of us just get up and do the same thing today, and we're going to do the same thing tomorrow because that's what we did yesterday, and that's the only reason why, without hitting the pause button. And so, how do you hit the pause button? I mean, what do you do? How do you think about where you're going? How do you set goals that are correct and that are going to motivate you and drive you and help you find that identity without sports?
It's so interesting. I've had the opportunity to work with programs like Princeton, UVM, University of Vermont, Rutgers, Johns Hopkins. And what's amazing, Jim, is that, you go to a team and you ask them what they want, and the first thing they say is, we want to win a Big Ten championship, or we want to win an NCAA championship, and fully recognizing that really the smallest percentage of us actually have the opportunity to win a championship. And I think it's no different. The idea of making the pros, like the top 1% make it. And I think it's no different than life. I think the top percent of us live life in the most fulfilling way. I think so many times we feel like we're getting to where we want to go. And it's interesting working with these Division I programs, working with Division I coaches, that the idea of saying something and being able to get there and making sure that you're along psychologically for the ride is something that is extremely challenging. And what I find is now at 38 years old, one of the things that I try to relay to all people is that it really is, it's not about always setting the goals. Like, and even as I say that, like, I think setting goals is a great thing. I think it's a phenomenal thing. But now I really just work for just work's sake. Like, I think when you sit there, you're like, okay, I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to go lose weight. And then what happens once we get there is we kind of stop. We kind of take a step back. Or, you look at the teams that build these dynasties, or you have people that are constantly successful, is that they're already looking at things well beyond just the goals. And so when these teams and these young people are trying to set these goals, I'm always like, just look at it one day at a time, kind of 1 minute at a time, one moment at a time. But bigger than that, like, you have to connect what you do at 7:30 in the morning to what may be happening for you at 3:30 in the afternoon. So many people, if they have like a 3:30 meeting, 3:30 training session, 3:30 practice, they get dialed in at 3:30. But they don't realize that what you're doing at 7:30 totally connects to 3:30. What you do at 9 o'clock in the morning totally connects to 3:30, and so on and so on. But what I found is that it's so easy to just say it. Like, it's so easy to say, well, my goal is I'm going to go lose weight. Our goal is to go win a championship. My goal is to make the most amount of money in the world. But at the end of the day, like, if you're not doing the things that you need to do day in and day out, minute to minute, hour to hour, and at the same time, like, ignoring the distractions to allow you to get to that point, then it's a real struggle to follow through on the things that you hope and want for yourself. Because, and as you know, I mean, we're in a Twitter, social media, Instagram, Snapchat world. where it's very easy to go online and get motivated and get inspired and feel like, okay, I'm moving in the right direction. But that may be a 2-minute video. That may be, a book or a passage that you read. But what are you doing every day that consistently allows you to say, I'm getting to where I want to get to, and it doesn't matter what anybody thinks because I'm the person that has to hold myself accountable for where I want to go.
Yeah, that's a good point. So you're talking about a little bit, it sounds like focusing on the process, not the outcome, right? You talk about goals down the road, but it's like, what are you doing today and this morning, this afternoon, tomorrow morning? And you talk about being consistent. It's such a hard thing to do is to be consistent every day and do those things. So it sounds like, are you saying it's deeper than just, going online, watching a 2-minute video or even listening to this podcast and getting all rah motivated, but it's like, what's the point? What are you doing this for? Why? You gotta have a deeper reason why, I believe. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And I think that's what's so hard is that, we're loaded with resources, but the ability to be resourceful doesn't happen when anybody knows about it. And I think that's the challenge is, what are you doing differently today that somebody else isn't doing? And the best example I can give is that there's times where people will sit there and say, Keith, I see you all over Twitter. I see you doing this. And then there's a period of time where you really don't hear from me at all. And I think the purpose of that period of time is to get that clarity, because just because there's an opportunity doesn't mean that opportunity or that time is meant for you. And I've always found that my best moments of clarity are the ones where maybe things aren't going out so well, or, and I need to really think quietly about what it is that I'm doing. And I'm sure no different than you and everything that you do. You have to have these moments where you're literally just, for better words, doing your homework and you're reading and you're not really paying attention to what's going on in the outside world.
Sure.
I'm sure if you've ever gone to a retreat and they say you can't have your cell phone, most people freak out. But then once they realize that 3 or 4 days after not having their cell phone, they feel pretty darn good.
Yeah.
Because they've now cleared their mind of all the clutter that goes on. And I think in order to see true growth and to sit there and get to where you want to go to, sometimes you can't always announce a partnership. You can't always say I'm sponsored by this and I'm doing this and I'm doing that. Sometimes you have to sit there and say, okay, let me turn off the noise so therefore I can take a big step forward. So therefore, when I come back out onto the scene, I'm a different kind of champion. I'm a different kind of warrior. I'm a different kind of woman. I'm a different kind of man. And that's the beauty of, quite frankly, just being able to sit quietly, to be able to collect your mindset and say, now I'm ready to take that step forward. And I'm there every day. And even as I say that for anybody that's listening, like that's the thing that for me, I sit there and say, you need to recollect yourself. It's not about, what Tony Robbins is doing, what Eric Thomas is doing, what Les Brown is doing, or what this person's doing. And I think those people are all great. But I also know that they're their own person. And I got to sit here and say, okay, what matters to me to get to the audience that I want to try to address? And I think it's no different. If you're UVA's lacrosse team, you can't worry about what UNC is doing at all. All you can do is worry about what UVA is doing. And I think it's so critical that, that you have to find those moments of real mental clarity in order for you to really move forward.
Yeah, and I talk about the productive pause, and for anybody who's listened to this show for a while, and I say this all the time, and it floors me, Keith. It floors me how many of my guests talk about that, how they talk about, and I only have really successful people on the show with a great message, and they talk about how they hit the pause button on their life. And I call it the productive pause, and I define it as a short period of focused reflection.
I like that.
Around specific questions that leads to clarity of action and peace of mind.
I like that.
It's so powerful. And you can do it on a daily basis, whether it's meditation or journaling or just sitting quietly, or you can do it, like you mentioned, a retreat. You can go to you can do a retreat for a week, or there's different periods that you can do, short periods. You can do it for longer periods. You can do it once a day. You can do it once, longer ones monthly, or even longer ones annually, etc. So important, this past weekend, my wife, we got 4 kids, and we never finish a conversation. I don't think we finished a conversation since my first kid was born, and we hardly ever get time together. So my mother-in-law's in town, and so we just got a hotel in downtown Charlottesville and went out, had dinner, spent the night in a hotel, woke up the next morning, had breakfast, had all kinds of conversations from start to finish. And it's like, it's hitting the pause button, right? Yep. It's like, it's hitting the pause button on life so that I can reconnect and rebuild that relationship. And it's like, man, how far that just reconnected us. Like, we were roommates basically, but in between these sessions, like half the time it's like, we're just roommates, living in this world. We're like 2 ships passing in the night, but we reconnect and we're like, yeah, it's still there. It's still us. We're the same people. We still have that deep love. And it's like hitting that pause button is so important. When you're talking about physically, your physical health, you're talking about your relationships, you're talking about your finances, you're talking about who you want to become and finding your identity. Shut everything down, stop the world, get off the treadmill, and just think, turn off ESPN radio, stop watching the game on the weekend, put the beer down, and figure it out, and there's no one right or wrong way. There's a lot of different ways to do it. But anyway, I'll get off my soapbox. But
no, it's all good, man. It's all good.
Got another question for you. You talk about you talk to groups about understanding the importance, the meaning, and the value of hard work. And I remember my freshman year in college, sitting there. Actually, no, it was my second year. And I'm sitting on a Airdyne bicycle in the wrestling room. And there's a guy named Mike Kravchik. He's a doctor, a really successful guy, MBA and a doctor now. And he's just that guy who everything just works for him, right? Well, everything works for him for a reason, because he works really, really freaking hard. And I was sitting there. Mike was actually the assistant coach at this time, and he was an All-American, Division I All-American. He was my hero, my idol. And I said, Mike, what do I got to do? And in so many words, Keith, he just told me, you got to work harder. Yep. And I was a pretty hard worker, but he told me, you got to work harder than you're working now. And I'm really proud to say that my sophomore, junior, and senior year at Virginia, I was voted by my teammates and the coaching staff as the hardest worker on the team. I got those 3 plaques on my wall. It's like, I'm more proud of those than being a Division I All-American or an ACC champion. It's like, I was the hardest worker, and I take a lot of pride in that. So tell me about how you share that message, and tell me about hard work and why it's so dang important. And I think a lot of people think they're working hard, and then you see really successful people and you go, well, that's hard work.
It's interesting. It's interesting that you say that. I mean, I have some pet peeves, and I think the one pet peeve that I have is a lot of times, you have the uniform that you put on, before a game, and then underneath that uniform, a lot of teams have taken on the idea of having another shirt, and in the back of that shirt, maybe there's a saying or a word or something that, it could be something like work hard, and it's a bit of swag, it's gear, it's something they can pop and say that they're doing. But the definition of hard work for me is no different than when you go into the gym and you get to that point where that lactic acid is really, really filling up and you're tearing down your muscles. And at that point in time is where your muscles really start to grow. And a lot of us get to a point where we can't get to that threshold. Like we don't want to go there. And so our initial connection was through a CrossFitter, Chris Spieler. And the one thing that without a doubt that anybody can ever say about Chris Spieler is that this man goes to a place physically and mentally that is very, very scary for most people.
Yep.
Right. And so
you just got to watch, just Google it for the listener. Just do a couple YouTube videos for Chris Spieler, some highlight videos, and you'll see this guy just collapses in sheer pain from lactic acid and burn. But anyway, go ahead, Keith.
And it's a lot. And I think it's no different with anything else. I mean, whether or not you're reading a chapter in a book, and you sit there and say, well, once I get beyond this chapter, I'm good. If you're writing a book, which, I'm in the process of doing, but the hardest thing is to get really beyond that, and it's a buzzword, but that comfortable level where you're like, okay, yeah, that was good enough. Right. And what separates us from this idea of being good to being gritty and great and incredible is getting beyond what is just feeling really, really comfortable all the time. And unfortunately, I'm a part of a generation where I want everything to be good for my kid, and I want to see kids happy, but we stop pushing them to a point where it's like, well, I'm afraid, if I push them too hard, what's going to happen? And so in working with kids and in getting to them, I'm trying to push them to the point where it's okay. Like, it'll hurt, but it'll be okay. And I'm not even talking about just physically. I'm talking about the idea of allowing your mind to be okay to go to a place where it doesn't feel good. But beyond that, man, there's a level of blossoming and beauty that is something that I can't even explain.
Right.
And I think a lot of us, we hold back because we're afraid, right? Like, we're afraid of, well, what happens if it hurts too much and I don't make it? Well, at the end of the day, if you don't go there, you're never going to get there. And so the idea of really looking underneath the helmet, looking into the eyes, into the power of a human spirit, to sit there and go, there's nothing that you can't do. There's nothing that you can't bring. There's nothing that you won't accomplish if you just allow yourself to go there. And by saying, I'm going to get up and I'm going to work hard, and you tell your mind that through a mantra every single day, see what happens. But most of us, once it gets a little bit hard, that self-doubt comes into play. Just that little bit of something that says, you know what, let me just take a step back.
All right.
And I'll go home and I'll say I worked out. But what did you actually do when you went there? I'm going to go home and I'm going to say I'm going to read a book that's going to get me to another level. But once that game came on, as you said, well, I'm going to go to the game, put the book down, go get the 12-ounce beer. And then, then you're no longer there. But
And you could say, I tried,
right.
I tried, but you didn't push through the pain and the self-doubt.
And that's one of those things that, the ability to stay out of our own way. And our biggest distraction is it's always ourselves. It's never another person. It's never another person. And I can speak on that because I know for many, many years, and I always tell kids all the time, Batman wore this deflection belt, and he always avoided what was hard. If you ever look at the Dark Knight Rising movie, and I laugh at that because every time something came at me, I was able to deflect it in another direction. It's not me. It's never me.
Right.
It's never about me.
Right. And
our decisions, our thoughts, everything that we're about is solely about what our own current mindset is. And so even as I say that, I'm not perfect. I haven't figured it all out. It's a day-to-day grind.
Yep. Man, what a great message, Keith. I want to leave the listener with some actionable stuff here. What's one thing that the listener can take from this? One action that they can take in the next 24 to 48 hours that can help them start moving towards their goals and the things that they want to achieve and get out of life?
I think there's three things that I really focus on that really have nothing to do with outcomes. And I think the first thing is, you just kind of got to decide, be honest with you and really decide what you really want. I think a lot of times we think we want something, but we don't really want it that bad. And so I think the first thing you have to do is you just have to make a choice and decide. If I want to have a championship mindset, if I want to have a winning mindset, if I want to have a beast mindset, then I have to start doing those things. And once you decide you do that, whether or not you got to write it down on your hand, whether or not you got to paint a dry erase thing on your wall, whether or not you got to write it down in a journal, but somewhere physically you have to start seeing the things that you want, and they have to be the things that you see every single day. I think secondly, and I do this probably every Monday, is I surround myself with influential people, but more importantly, accountable people. Which means I don't call my mom, I don't call my grandmom. I call people within a network of coaches and mentors that are going to sit there and say, Keith, have you tried this? Have you done that? And there's no agenda. Like, they're rooting for me, but they're going to be honest with me. And that's not 10 people. I'm talking about 3 to 4 people where they sit there and say, try this. Can we help you here? And therefore, they're rooting for you. They're on your team. There's no agenda. They're just trying to be there for you. And at the end of the day, they ultimately are successful people. They're speaking the same language. And you don't surround yourself with people that are going to hurt you, but people that are ultimately going to help you. And I think the last thing, and it's really just an everyday thing, is I just expect that great things are going to happen, and that's from being a renewed father. I expect to be a great dad. I expect that the sun's going to come out, even when it's been cloudy on the East Coast for the last week and a half.
Yeah, no kidding.
I expect to win. I expect these things. And I'm not trying to be cocky and saying that. I mean, I think it's just, once I expect the opposite happens. And the one thing I know is that your mind dictates everything that happens for you. So,
love it. Well said.
Wherever your mind goes, everything else will kind of flow in that same direction.
You got that right. All right. What about a book? Can you recommend a book? Any book that's kind of really impacted you that you can recommend that we can read?
So it's kind of an older book. It was made in 2002. I think a lot of the good to greats. I think the Malcolm Gladwell stuff is great. This book is actually called The Pact. And it's actually, being African-American, it's about 3 African-American doctors that basically just made a promise to each other that they would get out of their current situation and get to a better situation. And that's about as simple as it really gets for me. I think for me, I spent a lot of time hanging out with the wrong crowd. And, no surprise to you, I came out with the wrong outcome. So what was very cool about this book was just these 3 young men made a promise. And I think sometimes if we just make that promise to ourselves, or maybe we find a group of people and say, I promise to you that I'm going to do everything it takes to get to where I need to be, to help you and to help you get to where you need to be. Sometimes it doesn't get more complicated than that. And, and I think as human beings, we have this real desire to self-belong, and this real desire to connect, and this real desire to be courageous, and this real desire to be brave. And the beauty of that book is that it really just adds a tremendous level of what these young men meant to each other, but more importantly, the commitment and the promise that they made to each other.
Excellent. Haven't had that one recommended yet. That's going to go on the reading list. Keith, I appreciate you making time to come on the show. You got any parting wisdom for us? Or actually, I want you to do that. I want you to promote, what you're doing. Tell the listener how he or she can find you and follow you, et cetera.
So, my website is the Wilford Movement. I'm on Twitter at the Wilford Movement, at the Wilford Move. But I think bigger than that, my biggest thing is take a risk. I take risk every single day. I try to fail at least 10 times a day. And by taking that risk and by failing and looking at it in a different way, it just becomes a tremendously fulfilling game that you end up just playing. And we only have a couple of opportunities to do this. So, I'm blessed. I'm fortunate that I get to live life the right way. And my only hope is that you strive to do the same for yourself and for the people that care about you the most.
Excellent stuff. And for the listener, I will have everything that Keith talked about there in the show notes. If you go to jimharshawjr.com/48, you'll be able to download the PDF that has the action plan. Bunch of great there's so many great quotes that came out of this, Keith. Oh man, this is awesome. A bunch of quotes, action items out of this episode. For the listener, I definitely recommend you go to jimharshawjr.com/48 and download everything from this episode. Keith, I appreciate you making time to come on the show.
I appreciate the opportunity, Jim. It's been awesome.
And for the listener, until next time, just like when you were an athlete, take the time to get clear on your goals and embrace failure as a stepping stone on your path to success.